This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglin.
What do Christmas and deer season have in common? The biggie is neither arrive soon enough. 283,000, give or take, deer hunters, that's men, women, children, and folks visiting from out of state, are ready to take to the deer woods Saturday, November 9th, the opening day of Kentucky's modern gun season. That 283,000 also includes this week's guest, Dr. Tina Brunjes. We go inside outdoors next on Kentucky Afield Radio.
Hello, you're a really big fish.
Here's your trash.
What?
All the stuff you dumped on the ground washed down the storm drain and straight into my home.
I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Don't let it happen again, or else.
It's time we all did our part to stop polluting Kentucky's waterways. To find out how you can help, visit stormwater.ky.gov. Brought to you by the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet.
Deer in the headlights. Watch out, Mr. Deer.
Singing with your kids in the car is one way to keep deer hazard season in mind. And should a deer catch your headlights, flash those lights, sound your horn, break its concentration to scurry it along.
There's one.
And where there's one, there may be 2 or 3 more. Deer hazard season runs through November, so be wise behind the wheel while nature runs its course. A message from Fish and Wildlife and the Kentucky Office of Highway Safety. The expert in charge of Kentucky's deer and elk program with the Fish and Wildlife Department here in Kentucky is Dr. Tina Brunjes, and she's one of those doctors who is really one of us. Anytime anybody meets her, it's a first-name basis instantly. And Tina, when Kentucky's deer season ended, you celebrated an all-time record harvest of 131,388 white-tailed deer. That's up about 7,000 over the previous record, 124 and change. That doesn't happen that often. Tell me how the stars aligned for Kentucky this past harvest year.
Yes, last year was definitely a unique situation of we had good habitat conditions across the state. It had been a little droughty in some places. The mast crop was somewhere between fair and average, and so there was a lot of motivation for deer to get out and look for food. At the same time, we had the jackpot of 3 weekends of perfect hunting weather during our modern gun season. Modern gun season drives our harvest. The vast majority of our harvest, 80-some% most years, comes from gun harvest. And the modern gun season is key. Well, in any 3 weekends in the fall, usually you're going to get a rainy, windy weekend somewhere in there, and a lot of hunters either aren't able to get out, or they do, but the deer aren't moving well, something like that. We just had perfect alignment, and hunters saw deer, hunters took deer. It was a fantastic year. We don't expect to have that level of harvest again this year.
Plus, you had an extra week in the season, as I recall.
Yes, the archery opened as early as it could, so we had our maximum season, which I think happens like every 6 or 7 years where it falls on that first day of the month, so that gets you up to 7 extra days, depending on what year you're comparing to. And we've posted record archery harvests in the months of September and January for several years now. You've got your archery hunters are out there as much as they can be. They're having a very successful year. Throw 3 good weekends of gun season on top of that, and voila, you've got a record-setting season.
You do indeed. You've done research in this extensively to have your doctorate in it. Was this in Texas that you did your...
I did my PhD work in West Texas, yes.
Texas Tech?
Yes.
The climate in West Texas, a little different than here in Kentucky. It's
a very different situation, particularly in that part of Texas. They have a longer gun season, so they're not as affected by weather in, a 3-weekend period. And they have a much more dependency on rainfall in that part of the world. Whereas here in Kentucky, even in a drought year, there's still a sufficient forage base that you're not going to see significant numbers of deer starving to death in the wintertime. And so here in Kentucky, we have a much higher plane of nutrition. Our landscape can carry a lot more deer on a square mile basis. Out there, if you had 13 deer per square mile, that was fantastic. Whereas here, 13 deer per square mile, we're like, hey, that's good for making sure that everybody's getting enough nutrition, but in a lot of areas, we can carry more than that on a year-to-year basis.
13 deer per square mile. That makes me want to jump down my list here. I had your colleague David Yancey on a couple or 3 months ago, and we were talking about some of these things, but he was talking about how Wisconsin is ranked number 1 for deer, I think, as we speak. And Kentucky was number 2. And we were talking about the deer per mile versus the number of hunters there are. So, Tina, when we talk about Wisconsin being number 1 and Kentucky number 2, people may say, oh, basketball. But we're talking deer. Has that changed since we had Dave on a few months back?
It has not. And Wisconsin's perennially number 1 or in the top 5. And to be second to Wisconsin is a pretty good achievement for us. They have a lot more deer. They have a lot more deer hunters. They've always had the potential to produce a lot more trophy animals than we do. But I would say that we provide just as good of a hunting experience for our hunters as Wisconsin does.
So, if they have that many more hunters and that many more deer, seems like they'd be number 1 all the time.
Indeed, and I would argue that trophy production is just one facet of the deer hunting experience. And if you look at the Outdoor Life article that ranked Kentucky the number 1 deer hunting destination, trophy production was certainly part of that, but we're interested in a whole lot more from a deer management perspective than trophy production. Sure, that's an indicator we're doing our job very well, but there are other equally important metrics that we have to consider. We want our hunters to see deer. We want our hunters to successfully harvest deer. We also want our deer to be healthy, because healthy deer is indicative of a healthy landscape. And if you have too many deer, they will start to eat themselves out of house and home. They will impact forest regeneration. They will impact crops. You will see damage to people's homes and property increase. And so we don't want to focus too much on that trophy production thing. Sure, that's a laurel that we'll take, but we don't want folks to think that that's the only thing we consider.
If we're talking about Wisconsin number 1, I guess we're talking about the harvest year that has ended this year. So when Kentucky was number 1 2 years ago. Correct?
After the 2011 season.
I presume by now you're getting all those deer back from the taxidermist, and those final figures, I presume, are in or close to it.
They are, and we certainly didn't post as many trophy deer for the 2012 season as we did for 2011. We may see that shift after this upcoming season, the season we're going into, 2013. We've got deer that are on a great nutritional plane. We had a very rainy year here in Kentucky. We've got large plantings of soybeans and corn again this year, and so there's a lot out there for a deer to eat, and has been since the end of winter. So these bucks have been growing their antlers all season long with plenty of groceries out there.
I've got the press release from the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. Came out in May of 2013, and it says pretty much what you're saying. Outdoor Life named Kentucky as the nation's top destination for trophy deer hunting. It goes on to say the National Hunting and Fishing magazine based those rankings on, of course, trophy deer production, but hunter density, fees, and how hunter-friendly the laws and regulations are here in this state. That points right back to you. You're in charge of suggesting to the Fish and Wildlife Commission the laws that should be in place, right?
Correct.
Well, my hat's off to you. Thank you, and on behalf of thousands of deer hunters out and about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a labor of love.
You've done well. I saw a TV show last night that somebody said, how's work? Said, oh, it was beautiful. I just feel guilty taking the money.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I got to pay the bills somehow.
But you have done excellent work, and you said you've been here since 2005.
November of 2005 was when I started with the department, and I quickly realized that I had stepped into one of the best managed deer programs in the country. And I spent a lot of time just learning about Kentucky, because I'm not originally from Kentucky, and learning about the hunters here and the deer herd here and the past management that had gotten Kentucky to the point of being on the cusp of being a top deer hunting destination. And since then, one of my main goals has been simplification, trying not to have more changes to our regulations and rules than are necessary, to tweak it where it needs to be tweaked, and let the hunters do their job and let them have as much opportunity and freedom as they need to manage the deer herds on their property. And I think we've been pretty successful with that, and it's certainly not because of me alone. I've got a team of biologists that work in my program that are second to none. We've got a commission and leadership that listen to the biologists, they listen to the science, they listen to their hunters, and they marry those things into what I think is a top deer program.
That's it. That's a perfect example. When people work together for a common goal, it's amazing what can be accomplished. Tina, we have a break. Music is playing, and when we come back, how many deer does Kentucky have? I'm going to put the question to you. How do we know? We'll take a look at some of the science biologists keep up their sleeve. I'm Charlie Baglan. Stay with us. This is Kentucky Afield Radio. Charlie Bagman back in on Kentucky Afield Radio. In the studio with me is Dr. Tina Brunjes. She's in charge of the state's deer and elk program. And Tina, on November 9th, the state's deer herd is going to drop by 2 or 3. Right now, the state's population is at 850,000. Am I close?
That's our approximate statewide estimate, yes.
There is no Facebook for deer where they check in and say, I'm right here and I live in this county. Doesn't work that way.
Yep, no census.
I've been with Kentucky Afield Radio and TV for about 1,000 years. And there was a piece that, I'm going back here with Dave Shuffett. Now, this was like early 90s. And they called it the Ballard Deer Drive. They would get students from Murray State University, and they would all walk through the woods almost like in unison. Maybe 500 of these kids, and they would drive all the deer out of a given section of woods. I know you're familiar with this type of thing. In doing that, the deer would run. You could sort of get a count of how many there are in a given area. If that's still done, I don't know, but how do you know? How do you estimate 850,000?
We use a model. It's called a Downing reconstruction model. It's a mathematical formula, and it's based on the number of animals harvested and the sex and age of the animals harvested, as well as our estimated number of fawns produced per doe and our estimates of non-hunting mortality. All of that goes into a mathematical formula that generates an estimate. Now, 800,000 deer. What does that mean? In my mind, I can't picture 800,000 jelly beans on a table. I don't really know what that looks like. What I do know is that was the estimate last year, and it was the estimate the year before that. So now what you're generating is a trend, and that's what we manage based on, because you have 3 scenarios: too many deer, not enough deer, and a good, happy number of deer. And it doesn't matter if that number is 1 or 1 million. What matters is, does that suit the area? Does it suit the hunters, the farmers, the landowners, the public? Are people satisfied with that number? And that's not a magic number. That is a trend. In other words, if folks aren't happy, we're going to tweak things to bring that population up or down as best we can using harvest. That's our primary management tool, particularly harvest of does, because they're the ones, let's face it, who are reproducing. Humans, we want to know a number. I always want to know how many of this, or how many were left, how many, we all want to know a number, but that number doesn't mean anything unless it's in context. And so that's why we talk a lot about deer density, estimated deer per square mile, because that's a little bit more meaningful in terms of, if I say your county has a population of 5,000 deer, okay, what does that really mean? If I say that it has 20 deer per square mile, that means you've got a good, healthy deer population in most areas. If I say you have 120 deer per square mile, it's probably too many deer. They're probably starting to impact the landscape. You're going to see browse lines. You're not going to see oaks regenerating in the woods. You're going to see deer getting hit by cars. You're going to see landscape damage. And so it's all about putting those numbers in perspective and which way are they trending. Are they trending up? Are they trending down? Are they staying stable? We're very pleased that throughout most of the state it's staying stable. Now, there are areas in northern Kentucky where deer densities are 40, 50, 60 deer per square mile. That's getting pretty high. Southeastern Kentucky, we've got places where it's 5 deer per square mile. That's pretty low. We'd like to bring both of those more in the direction of the middle.
Do you still do those deer drives? Is that antiquated now?
It's still an effective tool. The problem is that eats up an enormous amount of manpower, and you can still get viable estimates using harvest data. And it's all about working smarter, not harder. If you can get an estimate of your population without that kind of input of manpower, then it seems more logical to me. You know, back in the days when they were doing a lot of those drives, hunting was very limited, and so you weren't able to generate good estimates through your harvest numbers. Now that we have harvest numbers, we have spotlight counts. 3 people can do a spotlight count in 3 nights and get a reasonable density estimate for an area. And we do have a lot of our WMAs and public hunting areas that still do spotlight counts and that still do track counts and that still do these new sort of newfangled camera surveys using Trailmaster cameras. And so there are better ways to get a count. Now, granted, drives were billed as being a way to get a complete count of almost every deer in the area. And that's certainly a laudable goal, but it's not really necessary.
I had Stephen Dovey on not long ago. He was out talking about turkey season for fall. I asked him, there seems to be a difference between deer and turkey management, because you're just saying unlimited doe harvest, your emphasis on hunting does, the $1 limit. And with turkey, their spring season is just gobblers. Mm-hmm. And so you're not out to take away the female segment of the population. It seems that if that were the case, that turkeys would be growing left and right. And maybe they are. Talk to me about that. Make some clarification of why you do one for one and another something else for another species.
And that's a great point, because if you're very familiar with one particular species management, it's kind of fascinating to look at the difference in other critters and how we manage those. And some of it is kind of logical if you stop and think about it. There are a lot more things on the landscape that will eat a turkey. It is very difficult as a turkey poult to make it to adulthood, because everything's bigger than you and everything considers you a nice little morsel of protein. Everything being? Bobcats, coyotes. When the poults are small, and even when they're just still eggs, there are numerous predators. Pretty much all of your possums, raccoons, skunks, all of those things will eat the eggs. And then when the little guys do manage to hatch, you've got bobcats, coyotes, vehicles running them over. You know, one of my most traumatic moments was running over a turkey poult. Little fella ran out in the road. Wasn't anything I could do. So it's a lot harder for young turkeys to make it to adulthood. Whereas while fawns face some of the same challenges, fawns aren't having to worry about skunks and possums and raccoons eating them. They're not worried about foxes eating them. They're not worried about house cats eating them. And so it's a little easier to make it to adulthood. And even adult turkeys still face a lot of challenges. There are still bobcats and coyotes out there on the landscape that are perfectly happy to eat an adult turkey, whereas those two predators have a much harder time taking down an adult deer, and so their impact on the population is much lower from a deer standpoint versus a turkey standpoint.
Deer in Kentucky, are you content with where the population is? Does it need, well, I know we have zones 1, 2, 3, and 4, so there's certainly a northern Kentucky needs to rid themselves of a few deer, but generally speaking, we are very pleased with where the deer herd is, and our hunters are pleased with where the deer herd is. We hear from folks who let us know where they feel like it needs to be lower or higher, and we're certainly interested in what's going on in southeastern Kentucky. We're starting a research project this winter, collaring a bunch of does and looking at fawn mortality and doe survival, trying to figure out exactly what metrics it is on the landscape. Is it a food issue? Is it a predator issue? What's going on down there that's keeping those herds? They are starting to recover. We've gotten a little more restrictive about our harvest down there, and it's taken about 4 years to start seeing a response, but we'd like to know why it's not responding faster, because deer herds are usually pretty responsive. The folks who had the bad hemorrhagic outbreak in 2007, they're starting to see significant improvements in deer density numbers. And so we know that if you back off of your doe harvest, normally you see a pretty fast response within 3 years or so, 3 to 5 years. And we are starting to see that in southeastern Kentucky, but we're still not real happy with where those densities are, and we have to find out, is it something that we can address as an agency? Factors that go into population management. Are we gaining new hunters? Is the level of hunters declining, level,
There was just a big survey that came out that showed that in some states, and Kentucky was one of them, that the number of hunters seems to have stabilized to even slightly increasing. And nationwide, it has slightly increased. And that's very encouraging because most states have started 10, 20 years ago, started realizing that the number of deer hunters, the number of hunters overall, was stable to declining. And that the average age of hunters, when I was in college, we always heard the number was 40. It was, they were in their 40s. Now we're hearing they're in their 50s. And so states started putting a lot of time and effort toward hunter recruitment, toward making sure that there were ample opportunities for parents to take their kids hunting, or for someone who was interested in hunting to find a mentor. Because like a lot of sports, hunting's not something that you can just walk out the door and decide you're going to get involved with today. You need somebody to get you through the initial stages, show you the equipment you need, get you a place to hunt, show you what to do when you do harvest an animal. And those efforts are starting to pay off. And the interest in deer hunting has exploded along with the deer population. A lot of folks started out small game hunting. There weren't deer to hunt in a lot of areas. Now we have more deer hunters than ever before, and they are critical to deer management, and so we need to make sure that we maintain those levels. And it's encouraging to see that recruitment programs and awareness is slowly starting to pay off.
T, we need to get to a break. I hear the music playing. Fishing report is coming up in our next half hour. Let's talk mast crop and scouting. And what about this? Taking a friend or a kid or a coworker with you when you go hunting. A thought. I'm Charlie Baglan. You are listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Charlie Baglan back on Kentucky Afield Radio into our second half hour now. This weekend, November 2nd and 3rd, Youth Waterfowl Weekend in the Eastern Zone in Kentucky. And don't look now, it's also time to change your clocks. Roll back 1 hour. I remember as a kid when we would set the clocks back, I played a little joke on my grandparents. Not only did I set their clocks back an hour, I actually set it back like 2 hours and 38 minutes or something. I still can see the look on their face. It's utterly confusing. So why is it dark at 3:45 in the afternoon? Anyway, it's not funny, but it's funny. It's time now, though, for our fishing report.
Hi, this is John Williams with the Fishing Report for Southeast Kentucky. At Lake Cumberland, striped bass fishing has been good of late. It's been a little bit hit or miss, getting reports of fish in the jumps most mornings, so you can count about any kind of surface bait or swim bait. Hearing reports of fish mid-lake and lower lake. Give those a try. There's still a few fish deep, but most of those fish should be relatively shallow, 25 feet or less, and again, jump fishing on some mornings. Elsewhere in the district, at Laurel Lake, fall smallmouth should be good for the next several weeks and into the winter months. You can catch those fishing a small jig, either white or chartreuse, casting on long points or submerged islands. Also in the district, trout fishing in the tailwater should be heating up. We stocked some extra trout this week. Some of our delayed harvest streams have been pushed back a few weeks because of the government shutdown, but we'll be stocking those in the next few weeks and get caught up on that. So give trout fishing a try also. As always, good luck and good fishing.
Hi, this is Kevin Fry with your Eastern Area Fisheries Report. Bass fishing reports have been good at many lakes for keeper fish. Shad are stacked up in these creek mouths, and spinnerbaits have been effective at catching keeper bass. A few reports were mixed in with smallmouth bass being caught on top water at Patesville and Fish Trap Lakes. Fishing has been good for crappie at Dewey Lake and brush piles. Also, some nice black crappie being caught at Carr Creek Lake from brush, with larger fish going 10 to 12 inches. Buckhorn and Fish Trap with good reports for white crappie shallow on brush or weed bed edges. White bass reports from Dewey Lake have been good with fish up to 15 inches in most catches. Hybrid striped bass action has been good at Fish Trap Lake, with fish using shallow water and creek arms and submerged road beds. Locating hybrids was being done drifting jigs or trolling crankbaits.
This is Tom with your fishing report from the Northeast. The biggest thing we have going on in our part of the state right now is the fall muskie bite. Out on Cape Run Lake, muskie are all over the place, from the cove to the flats, and very active. We've heard several reports of multi-fish days and reports of some larger fish being caught. Most anglers are fishing topwater at this time and on the edges of the weed beds. Other than Cave Run Lake, we have excellent reports of muskie on the Kentucky River near Sturgeon Creek, the Licking River in the Blue Lake State Park area, Tigris, Kinnickinnick, and Little Sandy. Other than that, we are in the process of catching up on all of the trout stockings that were missed because of the federal government shutdown. Keep an eye out on the department's website for these announcements as they become available. This will include all of the trout streams, lake stockings, and fin stockings. That should do it for us. Lots of good action out there. Lots for you to take advantage of wherever you go. Good luck and stay safe.
Charlie Bagman back on Kentucky Afield Radio. Got some John Denver music standing by. If we have time, we'll play a tune or two. White-tailed deer season opens 11/9/13. The state's deer guru, Tina Brunjes, is back to talk with us more about it. Coming up.
Deer in the headlights. Watch out, Mr. Deer.
Singing with your kids in the car is one way to keep deer hazard season in mind. And should a deer catch your headlights, flash those lights, sound your horn, break its concentration to scurry it along.
There's one.
And where there's one, there may be 2 or 3 more. Deer hazard season runs through November, so be wise behind the wheel while nature runs its course. A message from Fish and Wildlife and the Kentucky Office of Highway Safety.
Uncle Chuck, what is fall?
Fall means football, but excitement doesn't end there. This is when Kentucky's outdoors are just getting started. The Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife reminds you lakes and streams are alive with fall fishing. And for many, the biggest game of the season is white-tailed deer. Get your fishing and hunting license and get your game plan together. This fall, take aim on a winning season at fw.ky.gov.
Kentucky Afield Radio, Bagman back. Tina Brunjes is my guest, and we are talking deer and elk right here on the heels of the opening weekend of modern gun deer season in Kentucky. What can you say to folks that are going to go hunting anyway? Maybe take someone with them that hasn't been before, might want to try it. Doesn't have to be a 12-year-old. Could be somebody 25 or 35.
We always talk about getting the youth involved because they're our future, but a lot of folks overlook the opportunity to recruit a new hunter either in the form of a family member, a significant other, or someone at work. And if someone expresses interest in hunting, take them with you. You know, it may mean giving up a weekend that you wanted to hunt. Add to it and take somebody with you, because anyone who has mentored a new hunter will tell you that there is so much joy and pleasure in being with someone when they harvest their first animal. If it's somebody who's taken a squirrel for the first time or listening to a pack of rabbit dogs for the first time, it sends chills down your spine just to be there with somebody when they're discovering for the first time what for you has become a part of your life and something that you really enjoy. And so I encourage people that if your kids aren't old enough to hunt yet, or if you don't have kids, or your kids are at that age where they're not interested in doing anything with you because you're their nerdy parent, look around you. There's somebody around you that would be interested in going with you. Maybe they just want to go and see what it's all about.
Hunters for the Hungry was introduced, I want to say maybe 10 or 15 years or so ago, as a means to take an additional doe and provided for meals. And Hunters for the Hungry has done good work. What is their role now, and how can people participate?
Well, that's a good question. This time of year is a good time of year to consider if your local processor accepts deer, and there's a list on our website and on the Hunters for the Hungry website of participating processors. If you can make that donation now, obviously they get the bulk of them during modern gun season, and sometimes they're overwhelmed or they've filled their quota. Now's a good time to think about making that donation. The meat is used all over the state. We can't even begin to quantify the benefits. Hunters for the Hungry is one of those rare win-win-win situations. It allows you, if you've already filled your freezer and you've filled your friends' freezers, but you need to remove some more deer off of your property, or you just aren't quite ready to hang up your weapons yet and get out of the woods, it allows you to take another animal and donate it to a cause where folks who need that protein will get it. And Hunters for the Hungry does all the legwork. They get the money, they pay for the processing, they make sure that meat is distributed across the state to facilities that need it. And we like to encourage hunters to, if you want to take a deer, find out where the processor is closest to you and be ready to take that animal, donate it, and know that you've done something good all across the board.
What did you want to talk about today? What's on your mind that hunters may want to know?
There's always a couple of traditional things that hunters want to know when they're getting ready to go out into the field. What kind of mast year have we had? Folks always want to know what do the acorns look like across the state. And we've wrapped up our surveys for the year. We're still compiling those data, but it's looking like white oaks, and this will be no surprise to anybody that's been in the woods yet, white oaks not doing too good this year. Red oaks, spotty, fair. They're producing acorns, but certainly not raining acorns all over the state. This year is a good beech year. For the folks in eastern Kentucky, that's good news for grouse hunters. Beech is a really important food source for a lot of eastern Kentucky wildlife, particularly grouse, when you're thinking about game species. And so from a mast perspective, it's average. It's not going to be a huge factor in terms of when we have a mast failure. We usually have a high deer harvest because animals are out looking for food sources. When we have a bumper crop of acorns, it's really hard on our hunters because things like deer and elk, they hole up in the woods, they eat that high-quality diet, and they don't have to go very far. That means, okay, if I'm a hunter, there's a fair amount of groceries out there. We've had a lot of rain, so there's a lot of forage out there. Food plots did great. Everything else did really well because of the rain, too. So it means that hunters are going to have to key on those travel corridors. They're going to have to really know where they're hunting and really know where the deer are wanting to be rather than waiting for the deer to come to them at a particular food source. Now, there are always food sources that are going to be hot. If you've got a persimmon tree, that's the place to be right now. If you've got a white oak that is producing, that's always the place to be. But hunters are definitely going to have a little different landscape to deal with than they did this time last year.
So you need to pay attention to scouting.
Absolutely. And any hunter will tell you that a big part of the fun and the experience in deer hunting is the scouting. Getting out there this time of year, trying not to get up in the ticks, but get out there and see where have the deer been traveling, where are the fresh tracks, what are they eating on my piece of property this year? Are they coming out into this field they came out into last year, or have they shifted over here to where this grove of oak trees is? And that's a lot of the fun, is getting out there and practicing your naturalist skills and seeing what these animals are doing.
What's your thought on the outdoor cameras you can tape to the tree or nail to the tree, and it'll tell you exactly what's coming by? Does that impede fair chase, or is that just make it a little bit more fun?
I think it makes it a lot more fun. And maybe it's the human aspect. We love to know what's going on when we're not there. And I think trail cameras have done wonders for helping hunters to know what's on their property. Folks will say, well, there aren't any big deer on my property. And they'll put cameras out, and they're there. They're just there when you're not there. And so I think it has helped a lot of hunters to learn more intimate details about the deer herd on their property. And it's fun. It's like Christmas when you pull that card out and you take it back to see what's on there, and people get all kinds of neat photographs. They get photographs of all sorts of critters they didn't know were on their place. And they see bobcats, and they see coyotes, and they see turkeys doing silly turkey things. And, they get neat photos of a raptor coming in and getting a small mammal in front of the camera. They see the trespassers on their place. And so I think for hunters and naturalists in general, these cameras are a great way. We're all busy. We're all working 40 hours a week. The kids have soccer practice. There's just so many things that, sure, we'd all love to spend hours sitting in the woods observing nature, but we can't necessarily do that. And these cameras, I think, help hunters to know that their management efforts are paying off. Even if you go out Saturday morning and you don't see a thing because it's windy, you still know that wildlife is out there and that your efforts are paying off.
I think it would be a plus because it lets you know, oh, here's Big Buck. He's here now. I know generally where he is. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to have success. And success breeds more success, wanting to go back, do it again. So I could imagine that if you're a failure at something, or you have just a slow day, and say, this is really not worth my time, having a trail cam might make the difference for you, and for the hunter and for the program, because the more people know where what is, it's just like if you want to go out and buy a big screen TV, if you know where the big ones are at the right price, you're going to go, versus having to shop all day. And so I'm thinking go trail cams.
Oh, absolutely. I think they've made it a lot of fun for a lot of people, and there's the potential some people are perhaps, using it to get an unfair advantage. But is that something that's widespread? No. Does the good outweigh the potential for bad? Absolutely.
Can we talk about elk?
Sure.
This year, Kentucky will issue 10 youth permits and 1,000 general quota hunt permits. That's through a random drawing. And the quota hunt permit number is 105 more than last season. And that represents an all-time high for the state. So are we at 1,105 or are we at 1,000? I can't remember what the draw was last year.
Last year there were 900 general lottery permits, and then there were the 5 special youth permits for 905 total permits in the draw. So this year we're at 1,010, as you said.
1,010. Now that's well and good, but how many really need to be given out to stabilize the population? I'm assuming that the 10,000 number is still where you would like to hold, but if it were 11,000 or 9,000, would it matter?
We talked earlier about how specific numbers are not necessarily that meaningful if you just throw them out of context. And yes, our population goal is still 10,000. We'd like to maintain the herd at 10,000. But there's another factor we have to keep in mind, and that's the availability of places to hunt. There's not a lot of point in issuing a whole bunch of elk tags that people are not going to get a chance to hunt because they don't have a place to go, or they're cheek by jowl on our public areas. And so we try to offer as much opportunity as we can and to increase that each year gradually so that the landscape can absorb those hunters, because it's a pretty special thing to get drawn for an elk tag, and we want to be sure that most people at least have the opportunity for a quality hunt. We can't guarantee them they're going to kill an elk, but we want them to be able to find a place to go. And so would we like to continue to increase our harvest numbers gradually so that we can maintain that 10,000? Yes, we would.
Would you suspect that in years to come it will grow beyond 1,000 permits issued?
I suspect that it will. We will probably continue to try to increase it in small increments each year because, like I said, it's not so much an issue that I'm concerned about over-harvesting elk. It's that I'm concerned about throwing way too many hunters out there. It would be like issuing elk tags for Franklin County. You could hunt all season long. You're not going to kill an elk in Franklin County. So you have to make sure you strike that balance between we absolutely need to harvest as many cows as we feel we need to maintain that 10,000 number. And I feel like we do need to increase our cow harvest each year to try to keep up with that.
The clock is ticking. We need to take a break. We'll be back with more on Kentucky's Big Game with Dr. Tina Brunjes. I'm Charlie Baglin. Stay with us on Kentucky Afield Radio. Back on Kentucky Afield Radio, this is Charlie Baglin. Tina Brunjes is my guest. She is the person in charge of Kentucky's deer and elk program. The Pick 2. Last year, Kentucky residents applying for bull firearms permit had a 1 in 151 chance of being drawn. Residents who applied for a cow archery permit, chances of being drawn 1 in 13. That's pretty sweet. Yeah, you just might get drawn for that.
Absolutely.
But nonetheless, the Pick 2 option, at least from when you started it, was you put in to hunt elk. Now you have cow elk, bull elk, with either gun or archery. You can pick the 2 that you would like. How's that working for you? What kind of feedback are you getting?
Well, you mentioned earlier trying to adjust our regulations to take into account hunter feedback. And that is a direct response to hunter feedback. Hunters told us that they wanted to be able to select whether they got drawn for a bull or a cow, and that they wanted the opportunity to either hunt with firearms or with archery and crossbow equipment. And we were starting to see our cow harvest numbers were not where they needed to be because hunters were getting drawn who had no interest in hunting a cow. And so that change was a direct response to a management need, a real biological need, and a hunter preference. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about it. The thing that I would want most hunters to remember is we have literally tens of thousands of people who apply to hunt elk in Kentucky. And we hear a lot of frustration from hunters who say they've put in multiple years and they've not been drawn. I appreciate that frustration. I do. But we issued 1,000 tags this year. We had over 30,000 individual people apply.
Is that from mostly in-state?
Mostly in-state. About 2/3 of those applicants come from within Kentucky. So you're looking at 20,000 of your fellow Kentucky hunters who are every bit as interested in elk hunting as you are. And these elk do belong to all of our hunters, and we do want them all to have an opportunity. But we realize that even if we just gave everybody an elk tag and made them go 1 through 20,000, that
the elk would be gone.
The elk would be gone, and we have to limit it, and we have to make it as fair for everybody as we can. The fairest system is a random draw. And we hear a lot about people wanting bonus points or preference points and that sort of thing. And we've done a lot of research. We've talked to a lot of western states. A lot of folks say they do it out west. Why don't you do it here? We don't have a lot of public land. We don't have sections and sections of federal lands where folks can go hunt. We're trying to give everybody an equal opportunity because we recognize that with 1,000 tags and 20,000 Kentuckians and another 10,000 out-of-staters, and remember, we limit those non-residents. They can only get up to 10% of the tags. So we're trying to provide a lot of opportunity, but we recognize a lot of people aren't going to get a chance to hunt elk. And, I wish that we were able to let everybody who wants to hunt, but we can't.
Elk population of Colorado, roughly, or Utah. Can you even guess?
I would have to go online and look, but it's orders of magnitude above our 10,000.
A little bit more than 10,000. So their elk population is very similar to our deer population. We want to hunt elk, go, essentially.
Some of those states do have over-the-counter tags, particularly for archery, and I don't ever see us being able to offer an over-the-counter tag situation, at least not in my career, because we have so much more interest in hunting elk than we have available elk. And hunters pay the bulk of our operating expenses as an agency. And so when they pay that $10 to apply for a bull tag, they are directly paying the costs of managing our elk. And that's absolutely critical. And we need to strike that balance between maintaining a high level of interest, and that's why, we've always had this random draw. It's always been a situation where anybody in the public can come and watch the draw be done. They can review the list as soon as it comes out of the computer. But we want to maintain a healthy herd on the landscape. We want hunters to have ample opportunity, but we also have to keep in mind that the elk program pays for itself. And there are only 2 other things we can say that about. Fisheries floats all of us, quite literally. Thank you, all of our anglers. And deer more than pays for the deer management program. Elk pays for the elk management program.
Do you manage deer and elk the same way? It's the same family of animal.
No, you don't. There are some similarities. The key to managing both deer and elk is harvest of females. You always have to keep in mind that you can harvest the males at a certain level, but that's not going to change whether the herd grows or shrinks. And so as managers, we're always interested in that female side of the equation. Hunters will hear me talk about buck-doe ratio in the harvest and how we want to see 50% does, and they'll hear me talk about with the elk that we need to maintain a higher than that. We need more than 50% of our harvest to be cow elk because they're harem species. They have a little different biology, and so they only have 1 calf versus deer that have 2 fawns. And so there are some fundamental differences in their basic biology and how they operate as a species that dictates a little different twist on how we manage them.
Can you comment about Missouri's elk restoration effort, how it might compare to ours?
We started helping Missouri in the winter of 2011, and we've shipped just over 100 elk for their Peck Ranch area, which, as you mentioned, is in the Ozarks down in southern Missouri. They do not have intentions of having a herd of 10,000. They don't have the landscape for that. But the animals seem to be adjusting quite well to their new digs there in Missouri. They're pretty pleased with what they've seen in terms of the animals staying put on the area where they've put them and calf production within that area. And starting in 2012, 2012, we started moving a small number of elk just across the border into Virginia. And so this year we'll be moving some elk to Virginia. It's the last year of their restoration effort. They've got some elk that have come over on their own, some Kentucky elk that have, moved across Pine Mountain and into portions of Virginia, and we've supplemented that with the animals that we've moved. And they're pretty excited. They've seen the success of the elk project in Kentucky and the economic benefits of that, and they're hoping to bring some of that to their side of the border.
Okay, last question, always asked. Do you text in the deer stand, or do you text on the way to the deer stand in your car?
I don't text in the car on the way to the deer stand. The roads are too narrow and windy, but I confess that I take my phone in the stand.
But you don't text and drive?
No texting and driving. I have a new truck.
I love it, Tina. Thanks for coming out.
You bet, anytime.
She's got a new truck. We are out of time, and I was really hoping we'd have a few minutes left to play something by John Denver, but not this week. Maybe next. This is Charlie Baglin inviting you to join us again in a week. We will go inside outdoors again, right here on Kentucky Afield Radio.